Welcome to today's webinar, jointly organized by the Coastal Cities at Risk in the Philippines, the National Resilience Council, the Ateneo de Manila University School of Social Science, and the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, as well as the Urban Resilience Laboratory of Arete. I am Joy Rocamora, a research associate of the CCARPH project under the Office of the President, and the Graduate Assistant for the Master in Disaster Risk and Resilience, or MDRR program of the Ateneo de Manila University. Please be guided by the following house rules. All attendees and participants are automatically muted upon entry, and all cameras must be switched off unless needed. The event will be recorded for documentation purposes. For speakers, microphones and videos must be used only when necessary, and for the attendees via Zoom, please send your questions through the chat box found at the bottom of your screen so our team can take note of these for the open forum. To start us off, we have Dr. Emma Porio, Project Leader and Principal Investigator of CCARPH, and Professor from the Ateneo's Department of Sociology and Anthropology, to give the introductory message.
Thank you, Joy. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Coastal Cities at Risk in the Philippines project holder and president of the Ateneo de Manila University, Father Roberto Yap, SJ, let me thank you for being with us in this morning's webinar. The Coastal Cities at Risk, a transdisciplinary research consortium of the Ateneo de Manila University, Manila Observatory, in partnership with the National Resilience Council, the local governments of Naga City and their academic partner, Ateneo de Naga University, the local government of Iloilo City and their academic partner, University of the Philippines, Visayas. So I would like to also thank our co-organizers, the Department of Sociology and Anthropology and the School of Social Sciences. Dr. Bopip is here with us now. And the National Resilience Council, the President, Antonia Yulo-Loyzaga, is with us now. Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank our distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Emeritus Raewyn Connell, for honoring our invitation to speak to us about the good university. Also, I'd like to thank our distinguished panel of reactors for the intellectual generosity all this time. Professor Cynthia Banzon Bautista, Vice President, Academic Affairs of the UP System. Professor Fabian Dayrit, Academician, National Academy of Science and Technology, and member of the Board of Trustees of the Ateneo de Manila and our own CCARPH advisor. I'd like to especially thank our partners of CCARPH and Ateneo de Manila. Number one, with Father Robert Rivera, SJ, President of Ateneo de Naga University, Dr. Clement Castigador Camposano, Chancellor of the University of the Philippines, Visayas, and now also the OIC for UP Cebu. And last but not the least, Dr. Edgardo Tulin, President of Visayas State University, who joined with us as partner of Ateneo de Manila and CCARPH last year. What is the inspiration of this webinar, The Good University? For the past 3 to 4 years, CCARPH has been working with local university partners, ADMU, UPV, and VSU. And also, we've been working with the local governments, with the private sector, with the civil society, community-based organizations in these places. Also in Muntinlupa, pamantasan ng lungsod ng Muntinlupa, we work with the NSTP group to do the participatory community risk assessment in Muntinlupa. So we've been working with local universities and local officials. And last year, at the height of the lockdown, we at CCARPH was writing our final synthesis report, and as well as delivering classes online. And we're also crafting a resilience toolkit.ph. I'd like you to invite you to Google resilience toolkit oneword.ph, because it houses all the actionable science and tools that we have produced with the universities and local governments and with the National Resilience Council. While we were working on it, on the Resilience Toolkit and also the final synthesis report, 160 pages and all, the UNDP released their Human Development Report 2020, wherein they highlighted that we are facing, the society now is facing the twin crisis, the climate crisis and the crisis of social inequality exacerbated by COVID. The negative impacts of the pandemic, we all know that, no? Also, at the same time, I came across the essays of Professor Raewyn Connell asking, what is a good university? What is the good university doing now in light of this crisis? So I would like to say that we're very thankful today that, Professor Raewyn Connell consented on talking to us about these issues. And also what we've learned in CCAR is that, one, we in the university must produce actionable science and tools, and that we must work with policymakers, national and local officials, civil society, and especially community-based organizations and the private sector. And we basically learned that, or at least one of the key lessons in CCAR is that we have to be part of the decision-making support system at both national and local systems. When people are very fond of saying evidence-based decision-making, but really, when we look at, what's really the evidence, it's right lacking. So I would say that we in the universities, in partnership with the private sector, with scientific institutions like Manila Observatory, and with and also with the research centers of the local universities, the scientists that they have, we must work together to produce what I call a risk-informed, resilience-driven planning and development processes and structures. So I would say that in the context of the twin crisis that the UNDP is talking about, the twin crisis of climate and social inequality and the negative impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, Philippine universities have had to recast their policies and proactively respond to these challenges. So I'd like to say that in closing, I would like to congratulate everyone here, the presidents, universities, academic leaders, and our partners in the communities of practice. I would like to thank you and to congratulate you for being brave innovators and leaders who continue to innovate in the respective domains towards a resilient and sustainable future despite our challenges. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Joy. On to you, Joy.
Thank you, Dr. Porio. Now we have the welcome remarks from the Dean of the School of Social Science, Dr. Czarina-Akpedonu.
Thank you, Joy. Dr. Raewyn Connell, Dr. Emma Porio, Dr. Maria Cynthia Rose Banzon Bautista, Father Robert Rivera, Dr. Edgardo Tulin, Dr. Clement Camposano, Ms. Antonia Yulo-Loyzaga, Coastal Cities and Risk in the Philippines Project Team, webinar participants, good morning. With the School of Social Sciences of the Loyola Schools of the Ateneo de Manila University, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar on the Good University. Over at the School of Social Sciences, we are promoting a way of practicing the social sciences as doing and thinking that has at least 3 dimensions. 1, fostering a sense of belonging as a way of ensuring successful navigations of university spaces by those who study and work in the university. The second dimension is the problem-solving mode that highlights the role of social scientists in offering not only analysis or critique, but practical results that help systems and institutions be prepared for the next social problem. And to offer practical results is to solve a problem. And 3, translocal and transnational engagements as a way for us to understand the Philippines better. I foresee that today's webinar will contribute to our understanding of how a good university fosters a sense of belonging in terms of commonality, reciprocity, and attachments to the university. At the same time, this webinar will also be a call that it is not enough to discuss and imagine a good university, but to work together in our various positions and capacities to focus attention to the workforce, the working conditions, relationships, and the long-standing problematic broader educational structure. In other words, the webinar today will be a call to the problem-solving mode. Our special thanks to Dr. Emma Porio, professor at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, and project leader and principal investigator of CCARPH project, for bringing us today, Dr. Raewyn Connell, whom we hosted here during the Asia Pacific Sociological, or APSA, conference in Ateneo de Manila in October 2012. That was 10 years ago, and Professor Connell, you are back with us, albeit online. I hope that the short time that we will have will provide an excellent opportunity to learn from one another and enhance the depth and complexity of our engagement with something very near to us, with something our own, our very own, the university. Have a fun and insightful time.
Thank you, Dr. Akpedonu. We now move on to our keynote lecture. Our speaker is Professor Emerita, University of Sydney, and life member of the National Tertiary Education Union. She has taught in several countries and is a widely cited sociological researcher. She is the current recipient of the International Sociological Association's Quadrennial Award for Excellence in Research and Practice. Her books include Ruling Class, Ruling Culture, Masking the Difference, Gender and Power, Masculinities, and Southern Theory. Her most recent books are The Good University and the co-authored Knowledge and Global Power. Her work has been translated into 24 languages. Dr. Connell has been active in the labor movement and in work for gender equality and for peace. Let us all welcome Professor Raewyn Connell.
Thank you very much. I hope my sound is coming through correctly now, and I'm just about to share screen. Okay, is that coming through okay? Good.
Yeah.
Yes, well, greetings from Sydney in Australia. I'm delighted to be back with you, if only virtually, as I had a most interesting experience and memorable experience on my previous visit. I'm hoping to talk mainly about the nature of university work and what that might tell us about the idea of a good university. I want to start with what the COVID pandemic has revealed about universities, particularly in my local experience in Australia, but I think the points do apply worldwide. Firstly, the pandemic has revealed some vulnerabilities in university systems, and that is something of a shock, I think, because in the decades before, the university system globally had been growing very rapidly and on a huge scale. So just before the epidemic arrived, universities globally were teaching about 200 million students. We had grown to a massive global enterprise, but there were, as I'll point out, already tensions and difficulties. The the image I'm showing now is an example of this from just a couple of years before the pandemic in South Africa, which has a substantial university system, though still a very unequal one, and where a shift to a fee-based funding model had produced immense difficulty, especially for students from the Black majority who form most of the working class in South Africa. This is a protest movement which became nationwide and disrupted, in fact, most of the universities in the country for quite a considerable period. It was called Fees Must Fall movement, and is, I think, an indicator of the tensions that existed within the university system even before the pandemic. But the pandemic has made the business model of fee-driven university systems even more difficult. In Australia, that has been crucial to job losses, and for a small university system, we have faced perhaps 40,000 job losses from universities around the country. And the pandemic has made it clear how uncertain, how contingent government support of university systems has become. So we've learned, therefore, some of the to see, as in other fields, how some social vulnerabilities and tensions that pre-existed have been amplified in the context of the pandemic, and universities have not been free from that. But more positively, COVID has also demonstrated quite dramatically the resilience and the capacities of the workforce, of rank and file university workers, both academics and non-academics, who are often forgotten in discussions of universities, but who constitute half our workforce and a vital part of it. So as universities, many universities tried to move their operations online, it was the rank and file workforce who basically had to do the job, and who've been extraordinarily creative and interesting, and have been able to shift modes of teaching, modes of research, and modes of communication among researchers too, illustrated, for instance, by the number of international conferences that have gone online and have been reasonably successful despite that dramatic change. So in a way, the COVID pandemic, for all its horror and the social disruption around it, has been a lesson to universities, both about bad things and about good things that we need, I think, to take into account in seeing the urgency of change. Now, there has been quite, in recent years, quite a lot of writing that has criticized universities for a variety of reasons, a highly critical literature, in fact. I have written part of that, but I've increasingly come to think it's important that we also develop positive models for the future, that we actually develop models of what involves, what being a good university or becoming a good university actually involves. And to me, the central part of that thinking, what we must do above all in order to develop practical models for the future, is re-examine the work, the labor that universities do in the world, the work we do for the society, the work we do for students, and the work we do for knowledge itself. And this is where my discussion of the good university has been focused. Excuse the little advertisement. this is what I've been working on for quite a number of years now. And of course, I won't tell you the whole story of a complete book, but I want to emphasize where the book begins, which is by thinking about the labor process that university workers are involved in. What do university workers actually do? Well, obviously, teaching and research are the two big things, and various forms of community service and so forth. Now, when you look closely at that labor, rather than sort of having sweeping generalizations about it or just ignoring it, as governments often do, but when you look closely at it, which certainly is one of the fields of research I have been involved in, looking at the labor process of intellectual work, I think three things strike me most of all about the labor that is involved in doing teaching, research, community service in universities. Firstly, it is intricate labor. It's not a simple labor process that can be mechanized in the way that many industrial processes can be. It's constantly renegotiated and constantly improvised from below. That is the nature of teaching, for instance, it's improvisation. And it's a large part of research too, because if you already know something, you don't need to do research. It's around new problems that research gets organized, and therefore there is constant creativity and improvisation and coordination between university workers in advancing those projects. Now, this requires from the university workforce a tremendous amount of cooperation. It's not an individualist work environment at all, although some systems of management have been trying to make it individually competitive. We rely on each other. The academics rely on non-academic workers for just about everything we do in the working day. We rely on other academics. The students rely on us, and so on. There's an intricate web of cooperation that goes on in the ordinary everyday life of universities, and which is the essence, I think, of what universities achieve. And that, when you look at it closely again, is happening from the bottom up. It's the rank and file universities who actually make the show work. It's not something that can be, called into existence, can be commanded from above. It's not something that can be easily modeled from outside. It's not something that can be controlled by micromanagement from a distance. It is the engagement, involvement, creativity, and cooperation of the whole university workforce that really produces what universities produce in the way of teaching, research, and community service. And therefore, I would argue, one of the vital things that universities need, and that is central to any concept of a good university, is the sustainability of the workforce. It is really essential that workers learn about each other, learn from each other, and are able over time to cooperate. And it is that capacity actually which has been eroded by many of the commercial and managerial developments in universities in the last generation, to the point where, for instance, in Australia, in my country, in our university system now, something like 70% of the undergraduate teaching hours are actually done by workers who have no permanent connection with the university. They are what we call casual or precarious workers who are hired temporarily to do that very essential and quite difficult labor. So to my mind, there is a contradiction between much of the managerial model, the corporate style managerial model that has been applied in universities recently, and the actual labor process that university work involves. And that is a source of a great deal of the tension and difficulty in university life today. So what will a good university actually look like if we overcome those kinds of problems and actually move towards something much better? Well, I have basically, I think, five criteria for a good university. They don't come from global measures of excellence, from the global ranking systems, which purport to be definitions of good, of excellence in universities. But like this map of all the peer-reviewed journals in the world, in all disciplines put together, and you can see the enormous preponderance of the rich countries of the global north in the global journal, academic journal system. North America and Western Europe overwhelmingly dominant because they are the richest, basically the richest parts of the world, as well as being the old centers of imperialism. This kind of thing will not yield us a genuine assessment of how good the work that universities are doing is. Good universities, in my view, have 5 qualities. Firstly, they are democratic. They operate internally in democratic ways, and they serve democratic purposes in their society. Secondly, they are engaged with social needs, and we've heard already this morning about that in the Philippines context, and I absolutely agree. That's what universities need to be involved with. Thirdly, they need to be truthful. And it may sound silly to say this, but every time a university advertises in a market for students and student fees, we get misrepresentations. Whenever a university sets out to burnish its image and glamorize itself, basically the university begins to lie. And that undermines the cultural rationale of universities as places involved in the search for truth. Fourthly, universities are places of creativity. They are rightly involved with arts and creative activities, but they have to be creative in the very act of research and in the very act of teaching. You cannot be a good university if your teaching is mechanical or if your research is always, just whatever will be funded by the latest oil company or the tobacco company. And finally, universities have to be sustainable in a simple environmental sense, of course, but also in terms of their workforce. We have to be concerned with the next generation of university workers, both academic and professional workers, as much as we are concerned with the physical plant of universities. And it's not just individual campuses that count. We have to think about these issues at the level of a university system. And I think a university system has to be cooperative between the universities, so you can have divisions of labor and build up collective resources. It has to be inclusive in its relationship with the society. It cannot simply serve a privileged elite, as universities have commonly done in the past. And it has to be public, which doesn't necessarily mean state-controlled, but certainly owned, if you like, by the society as a whole, whatever the particular institutional arrangements. So those are my criteria for a good university and a good university system. And if we are going to move towards that, we need to build outside universities as well as inside them alliances for renewal of university system. And here I'm encouraged by historical experience, including quite recent historical experience. This is a picture from Chile on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, in South America. Just a few years ago, there was a student movement demanding renewal of public university system in that country. They called a meeting in Santiago, the capital, and about 1 million people turned up in support of university reform. Now, I don't think we would get that turnout in Australia, but it is tremendously hopeful that we can get that scale of engagement anywhere with a campaign for better universities. We certainly need to move towards more security for university workers, for the workforce, if the university workforce is to be sustainable in the long run. We need to move towards industrial democracy, towards workforce engagement in the management and control of universities. And finally, we need to be bold about new intellectual agendas in the university sector, new agendas in the curriculum, new agendas in research, and new agendas in community engagement. And I'm glad to see that is happening in the Philippines, clearly, and in other countries too. And I just want my final slide, also from South America, from Bolivia, one of the very poor countries in South America, which has been inventing, particularly with relation to indigenous communities, new agendas and curricula, and even building new institutions, in this case, Quechua-speaking university campus in that country. So there are grounds for hope, as well as tremendous difficulties that we are facing, but I believe that we can face these in a way that involves university staff and students engaged with excitement rather than fear. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Connell. So to give the response, we have a distinguished panel composed of heads of universities in the Philippines. Let us all welcome back Dr. Emma Porio, who will be moderating this session.
We're very honored here at the Coastal Cities at Risk in the Philippines and the Ateneo de Manila to have this distinguished panel of reactors. We will start in the order that they are presented here in the picture. We will start with Dr. Maria Cynthia Bautista, and then followed by Dr. Fabian Dayrit and Father Robert Rivera and Dr. Edgardo Tulin. And I've asked Dr. Clement Camposano earlier that if I can insert Yulo-Loyzaga to say her remarks before she goes, because she has an immediate meeting at 10, if that's okay. So Dr. Bautista, can we hear from you, your gems of wisdom, having been with the University EVP system and doing the academic affairs thing and managing the whole system. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you very much, Emma. So good morning, colleagues, and thank you, Raewyn, for your insightful presentation on the vulnerabilities of the university system that are actually surfaced because of COVID. And also thank you for your description of what a good university is. I think we would have a consensus on the description. And maybe my comments now will just really be about where we are and what COVID has helped us realize. So COVID has led us to a rethinking of the global norms that we're actually caught in, norms that are reinforced by what you mentioned in your slide earlier as international rankings. So I just, earlier this morning, because I'm part of a Viber group of some ASEAN colleagues, there was a report in WhatsApp. It's about Australia, and I think this is what you're actually critiquing in terms of some obsession with rankings and norms that that international rankings organizations are actually promulgating, which are the global norms. So I saw this screenshot of a particular news and a particular report. So I don't exactly know all the details, but it says that Australian higher institutions that the impact of COVID on Australian higher institutions is that the funds for research would go down. But the worry of that particular report is that there will be a projected decline by 35% in the rankings of Australian universities over time. So that concern says, because there will be less students, and it's international fees that actually are very important. So there will be less students because there's not much money that's going into study. So the thing so that you will be able, the universities will be able to rank, is that they should actually get more international students and compete with each other, and the fees will go down. But the point of this is that this is the obsession of those of universities in other countries. It's an obsession that has not really filtered to us, but still we're caught in a game. So unlike Australian universities and the Singapore universities in ASEAN, Philippine universities are really caught in this rankings game, although we do not orient our operations to the rankings criteria and never did. So for instance, our university never participated in the beginning before 2017, and what forced us to participate, in fact, we protested because one of the rankings organizations actually ranked us without getting data from us. We protested, there was no answer to that protest. But in 2016, our administrators decided to get into the rankings because we were being questioned by Congress, we were being questioned by alumni about how we fare. Because the rankings, the business model that you called earlier, the rankings that's part of this business model, that has become a norm. And but these particular pressures are not unique to us. These are also pressures that are shared by our other universities in the ASEAN region. In our pre-COVID biannual get-together with senior officials in networks such as AUN, the Asia Pacific Rim Universities, we usually complained about rankings, about why we are not getting to be so relevant to our societies, because we are expected to do certain things for rankings. We critique the methodology, and we actually spend hours talking about the political economy of rankings. But at the end of the day, and our common experience that we shared clandestinely with each other, was that we were being asked also by some enterprising groups whether we would want our students or our faculty would want our publications to be cited or our publications to be in journals for a fee. So the whole business is there, but all of us are caught in a sense that all our universities nevertheless have remained in this. But COVID, I think, is changing this, or at least changing and also challenging the rankings institutions. The spaces are more open now for reflecting on all of the norms that have governed universities, especially universities that are supposed to be doing research or research universities. And so right now, I think in China, they have already banned cash awards because we actually gave awards for publications. They banned cash awards because it has given rise to appropriate practices, such as researchers submitting plagiarized, fraudulent papers, etc. So in other words, the business model has actually created, and the commercial part of that has actually created a lot of commercial enterprises that are actually also against truth, against what the universities are supposed to be. So all of us still, I guess, we're still caught in, or we're still following the model. It's not just the commerce, but also natural science norm about publishing in index journals. But I think now there's a growing movement that is saying that that it's a proxy. The quality of the publication or the quality of the research is really the publication is a proxy for the quality of the research. And then we got into the impact factor thing, the impact rankings, not the impact rankings, sorry, but the impact factor even in our assessment of promotions. But that has also been critiqued, and I think it's very good that the space is there for such critique. It has been critiqued because impact factor does not necessarily redound to quality. And at the end of the day, the quality of a work is really what peers actually share. So there are spaces for the critique of what is dominant that should give way to our thinking of what the good university is about. So I guess COVID, and I agree with Raewyn, COVID actually allows us now to think about what a good university is. And especially, and also because research, our mandate is we are also a research university, but we are actually a teaching university. And this is one time when mentoring has become more salient because of COVID. I agree with you, it's the labor on the ground that actually has creatively adjusted, allowed us to adjust to COVID and allowed us to continue struggling to adjust and create in a very creative way. So I think what we need is to come together to share our experiences and also to forge, to more clearly reinforce what our university, a good university, should really be. I think one of our problems now, and this is, good university must be addressed. We must be able to prepare our students for a future of disruptions that are already with us now. I think COVID is our preparation for climate change. Climate change is going to be a worse situation than maybe the pandemic is now. And our job is to prepare students to cope with that future. But more than coping with that future, we have to prepare our students to be able to solve the complex problems of that future. So the whole education system will have to change. The whole way of teaching will have to change. And that's where the creativity comes in. And that's where I think your point about labor, that we have to take care of the people we have. We are also increasingly in a situation where we have faculty members. I don't know how it is in Ateneo, but in the University of the Philippines, we have a number of faculty members who don't have items. And what that means is they're not casual. Oh no, technically they may be called casual, but they have been there. They've been teaching for a long time, but they do not have the kind of security that the others have. And that's okay. But we also are now getting a lot more of lecturers. We're contracting more of them because of the COVID situation. But what you are telling us, Raewyn, is we have to do something about the situation of our faculty and also of our staff, and also about situations that they're not fully within our control. We are run, and I think my office is run mainly by contractual people who are actually very, very good, but they are really not completely part of us. So I guess right now, COVID allowed us, there's spaces for reflection on what we used to do and what are important to us. Some of this we can actually do something about. Some of this we're still caught in some bind. For instance, we're still caught in the bind of international standards, except that we do not really orient ourselves to meet the requirements. But just an interesting note is that research really figures heavily in the international evaluation of universities. And research in terms of the proxy is publications, but it's not just publications, the proxy is citations. And in that proxy, that's the only reason why we are able to rank. But if you unpack the citations, we rank because we have citations, a lot of citations because of international collaboration. But international collaboration, if you look and unpack it further, it's in areas where the Philippines, for instance, is a good place for people to put do their research in. So it is not necessarily reflective of the productivity of universities in terms of research, and also not reflective of the impending need for us to be able to focus also on teaching, and focus even more on teaching, because this is really where we're going in the future. Focus also on teaching because of the situation we're in. Truth, you mentioned that a good university actually must be a university where truth really is very important. And the role of universities now, the public role of universities, is to help dispel all the disinformation and train everybody to know and address fake news and alternative news, which actually leads to authoritarianism against democracy. So those are the points for now. Thank you very much, Raewyn.
Thank you very much, Cinz, for the excellent comments. We now move on to Dr. Fabian Dayrit. So, Dr. Fabian Dayrit, can you please give us your comments and your reactions to Professor Connell's talk?
Okay, thank you and good morning. And well, actually, I can follow through on what Dr. Cinch talked about. But I'd like to maybe quote from the conclusion of the article that Dr. Connell mentioned, when she said, we will probably need a range of new types of university as the domain of knowledge becomes more complex. We certainly need a habit of thinking for ourselves and generating ideas from our own situations and problems. So I'd like to take off from that and then also address the, or continue the comments which Dr. Cinch made. Well, it's clear that these rankings is really it's a commercial game. The top journals are not 10 of the top journals are all in the sciences and medicine, and the top universities are likewise in the sciences and medicine. So the rankings are really mainly based on publications in science, technology, and medicine. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic showed clearly that just having good science is not enough. A very recent paper this last month in the Lancet on pandemic preparedness highlighted also the importance of government credibility as well as interpersonal relationships, corruption, BMIs. Clearly, we need more than science and technology to survive this pandemic. The simple lesson here is that more than science, you also need to look at society and as well as ethics, since these drive the social capital. And to use a simple analogy of the brain, we need to balance the left side with the right side. Right now, with too much emphasis on science and technology, we're just working on the one side, but not doing enough work on the other side. Now, we talk about research universities, and research universities is, I guess this phenomenon is maybe in the past 10 years, but the definition of an actual research university is sort of amorphous. A research university is supposed to be committed to research. That's part of its central mission. But then what happens to teaching? So, of course, some universities do this by separating the graduate school from undergraduates, where teaching is mostly done at undergraduate level. But this is really leaves out other aspects of teaching. Of course, you need to teach undergraduates, but you also need to teach graduate students well. And now there's also the need for continuing education since we have an aging population. Now, the aspect of outreach has also increased, expectation for outreach, especially to address the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look at the, the 16 or the 17th UN SDG, they're very interdisciplinary. You cannot achieve them just by science and technology. Clearly, you need social sciences, you need ethics, you need philosophy and all that too, as well as culture and the arts to really move the Sustainable Development Goals forward. And then I'd like to finally talk about relevant scholarship, as Dr. Connell mentioned. Now, universities in the South need to generate original and relevant scholarship. However, if you try to do this, then you might get left out of citations because most of the big universities are not interested in ideas which are relevant to the South. I'll give you an example. This work I do on coconut oil. Coconut oil is the favorite whipping boy of the American Heart Association. And I've tried to publish in journals and I've been rejected because it's against the paradigm that the American Heart Association wants to push. So clearly that is that's one concrete example of someone trying to push a scholarship which is relevant for the South, but which is against the paradigm of the North. So this will certainly harm your global rankings if you continue to do that. So this is really one problem with this global rankings. So maybe on that final note, I'd just like to quote my favorite scientist philosopher, Albert Einstein, who said that the responsibility of every human being is to aspire to do something worthwhile to make the world a better place than the one we found. And for this, that human being, I suppose, should be, the academic. Should do something worthwhile to make the world a better place, more than just publishing. So on that brief note, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, my favorite chemist, Professor Dayrit. Thank you very much. Now would like to hear from Father Robert Rivera, SJ, President of Ateneo de Naga University. I'm very grateful to Father Robert for supporting our work in CCAR in Naga City. His scientists have been central in producing the climate disaster risk assessment framework and model in Naga City. So, Father Robert, can we hear from you, please?
Thank you very much, Doc Emma, and good day, good morning to everyone. Just maraming aga po sa Sindugabos. We are truly grateful for Dr. McConnell's ideas and insights on the good university, and we are thankful as well for this opportunity to offer a few reactions to this very fruitful discussion. Dr. McConnell's exhortations on radical change for the university and at the very core of higher education itself cannot ring truer than they do during these times of great upheaval for education and the world. We appropriate these exhortations here in our education work in this part of the Philippines, Region 5 or the Bicol region, and realize that many of the push factors for a radical rethinking of education are factors that we have already been experiencing here in extremis, here in Bicol. Even prior to the pandemic, Bicol was already enduring an even economic development with per capita GDP here second to the lowest in the country. For decades, as many of you know, the region has been known as the typhoon belt. Although we got a slight reprieve when seasonal cyclones started moving further south. With the onset of the pandemic in 2020, the region was hit with a double whammy. COVID and its terrible economic repercussions. And later in the year, just when we thought we were recovering a little, Typhoon Goni, locally known as Rolly, the strongest typhoon to hit land in recorded history worldwide. That's worldwide. Further battered an already reeling region. In this context, we would like to think that we have been taking to heart and living out, at the very least, by force of circumstance, some of the standards put forth by Dr. McConnell for a truly good university. Allow me to just focus on two, please, not to give the comments a more regional bent. First, at the heart of Dr. McConnell's ideas are the envisioning of the university as a truly dynamic community, facing contemporary challenges through the task of teaching, learning, and advocacy. It is an attempt to live out solidarity, throw in a little sociological parlance here, both in its organic and mechanical sense. Here in Bicol, we have been trying to live this out, this ideal, again, largely because we have had no choice in this, not only by strengthening intra-university communal ties for survival, but also taking seriously inter-university cooperation. For the past 4 decades, all of the HEIs in Bicol have been allied as the Bicol Foundation for Higher Education, or the BFHE, which has allowed us to undertake common academic and advocacy efforts in a democratic and engaged manner, the democratic engaged manner that Dr. McConnell points out. What was a terrible pandemic year, 2020, was unexpectedly a landmark year for the BFHE, when the Commissioner on Higher Education granted us, through its RECPE grants, the largest flexible retooling grant in the country. I believe only the UP Open University received a similar grant. This is for the training of teachers for flexible, blended teaching and learning across the region, for all schools, whether they be state colleges, universities, local colleges, or private HEIs. CHED cited the BFHE's track record of inter-university cooperation in awarding this landmark grant. Again, all this, along with all our other cooperative efforts with CCAR and many local government NGOs, all this, I think, are a big hats off to the democratic and engaged solidarity emphasized by Professor McConnell. And second, And lastly, responding to the exigencies of truthfulness, creativity, and sustainability stressed by Dr. McConnell as standards to be addressed for the good university, I would like to highlight here an ongoing process that not only the Ateneo de Naga, but all the Ateneos and surely many other schools, especially in the Catholic tradition, have been wrestling with, not only in the pandemic, but also with the onset of the fourth, some would say the fifth industrial revolution, and therefore education 4.0 or 5.0, depending on how you're counting. This would be the mission of liberal arts education in an extremely specialized and changing world, further aggravated by the pandemic. And the way forward, I would think, is towards what has often been referred to as intentionality and authenticity with regard to mission. In this case, the liberal arts tradition as something that continues to have a lasting and important contribution towards forming students who will be truthful, creative, and working towards sustainability. In the rush towards a, for lack of a better term, a cookie cutter kind of education that is job specific, emphasizing industry preparedness, the kind of critical thinking fostered by a liberal arts education tested over 4 or 5 centuries, I would like to believe will be indispensable in forming a citizenry, a Filipino citizenry that is resilient, ready to face future disruptions. So authenticity and intentionality in mission, I believe, is key to attaining truthfulness, creativity, and sustainability. So again, I am thankful to Dr. McConnell, to CCARPH, Philippines, and the Ateneo for affirming and inspiring us in this work of solidarity in education and in our efforts towards strengthening holistic education as paths for the post-pandemic future. Thank you very much. Salamat po.
Thank you very much, Father Robert, my favorite sociologist president in the Bicol region. Thank you very much for always supporting our work there and also here. Thank you. Thank you very much, Father Robert. I wanted him to be the chair of our department, but he said, oh, he doesn't have other things to do. Okay, thank you very much, Father Robert. Now we move on to, can we ask President Edgardo Tulin of the Visayas State University to share with us his initiatives in the Leyte and Eastern Visayas region. Thank you.
Okay,
and the country,
you.
Of course, yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Porio, for inviting me to this collegial discussion. And also, of course, to our speaker, Professor Connell, for sharing her views. I would like to especially mention also my colleagues here. Pleasant morning, especially to my former chairperson of the VSU Board of Regents, Dr. Cynthia Bautista. You know, when I was installed the president, she was actually the one who invested me in my presidency. So I really appreciate her presence today. And of course, to my favorite mentor, colleague, Dr. Toby Dayrit. Anyway, thank you so much. My reflection on the paper of Professor Connell is actually really anchored on the present realities of our universities here in the Philippines. Presently, I am the Vice President for the Association of State Universities and Colleges for the Visayas. And yes, it is true that our colleges and universities are really concerned on accreditation and ranking, even in the midst of this pandemic. Quite honestly, no one wants to be left behind in terms of ranking and prestige or bragging rights. Everyone wants to be on top, or at least the first of whatever ranking is up there. So honestly, this is not really bad at all, because along with these efforts of the university is the desire of our leaders and administrators to improve their status and quality. In other words, to become good universities. But how do we contextualize good universities? So if you want to be ranked in highly prestigious ranking bodies, of course, you have to satisfy their metrics. I have no question about these metrics because they are based on perhaps well-thought indicators. But what I am concerned about is how other universities with inadequate resources can live up to these standards. This brings me to my point of defining a good university, and the way we responded to the needs of the situation. I subscribe to the wish list of Dr. Connell, as Professor Connell, as she defines the concept of a good university. Educationally confident, socially inclusive, good places to work, democratic as an organization, so on and so forth. This is good because these represent the aspirations of many stakeholders in the university, apart, of course, from the obvious ones. But let me take this opportunity, however, to talk about how my university, the Visayas State University, has responded to the call of being a good university in reference, of course, to the crisis of our present reality on climate change and social inequality, with the pandemic challenge and the challenge of food security at hand. VSU, or Visayas State University here, aims to be socially relevant, with science and technology as our tool to effect change and also our enabler to address climate change and food security. A case in our rainforestation technology and our forest landscape restoration technology to reforest denuded areas using indigenous or native trees. This technology has been adopted not only locally, but also has been picked up by other countries in their reforestation initiatives. Our collaboration with other countries and other funding institutions also enabled us to expand our reach, extending these technologies to other areas. In fact, recently, we have also inked an agreement with universities in Australia for a project on nature-based solution for forest restoration and climate change mitigation. We also have an existing project on the water education project partnered with the Netherlands to address water shortage and to educate water users in our country. So therefore, to be socially relevant, universities using their technologies should address food security and food production, because these are the areas I think that we need these times now. And also, we have to empower our communities, especially those affected by disasters and calamities. As I speak now, our research and extension team of the university is assisting our communities, our LGUs, and our faith-based organizations in Southern Leyte, rehabilitating agricultural areas badly affected by Typhoon Odette. We deployed our extension workers based here for distribution of planting materials, seed pieces, and other commodities and other agricultural products as an immediate response to the needs of the communities affected by typhoon. So amidst this pandemic, we never stopped our efforts to be true to our mission of empowering our communities. So I can name more examples, but the point I am trying to say is maybe we are far from the global standards or metrics of being a good university as defined here, but we believe that what we are doing is what makes a good university to be socially relevant and can make a difference. Also, we teach our students to be socially conscious, care for the environment and the communities, and we also strengthen our curriculum for environmental conservation. And if I may quote Dr. Bautista's previous message, she also articulated in preparing our students for future disruption. This is very true because future disruption is inevitable due to technology, adverse climate conditions, social inequality, and so on and so forth. So these are the realities now, and we hope that universities across the country be able to realize that apart from these metrics and ranking, there are still other opportunities for us to be socially relevant and become quote unquote good universities here in our country. So this is my sharing, Emma, and I hope that you shed light to this discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Tulin. I'm just listening to all of you. I'm thinking we in the Philippines, we should have our volume of the good university. and sharing all the initiatives. Thank you, President Tulin. Last but not the least, can we now call on Dr. Clement Castigador Camposano, Chancellor of University of the Philippines, Visayas.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Emma, for this opportunity to be part of this conversation. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Connell for this wonderful article, and of course for triggering this conversation about good universities. And I think, you know, this is as good a time as any to actually have this conversation on what good universities are. Well, partly because I think that with our obsession, the current obsession for rankings and you know, the measuring of outcomes, that I think there is really the danger of universities losing their way. So there is a need for this conversation. Well, what I would like to say is that I think if you ask the question about what are good universities, I don't think that question can be answered in the abstract. In that sense, there are really no good universities in the abstract. Okay? I think there are only good Filipino universities or good Australian universities. I think it has to be grounded in a particular context. Although obviously there are interweaving themes or overlapping themes, and what I have to say about this really will touch on some of these themes. But that's one point I'd like to make: the need for context. You know, the Philippines is of course a very different place from Australia, and of course also it is a very different place from all the other countries in the world, and it's important to ground this discussion in the context of the Philippines. But nonetheless, I think it's important that you know, this conversation begins. Okay. Well, what are good Filipino universities, or what is a good Filipino university? The first thing I think we should think about when you talk about a good Filipino university is that a good Filipino university must provide safe democratic spaces I mean, safe democratic spaces for political and intellectual disputation. Okay? I think that's important. You know, in the age of hate speech and the weaponization of the internet, and of course, you know, disinformation and misinformation on a massive global scale, I think we will need every single democratic space that we can find to have precisely very important conversations on strategic issues. So we need to provide spaces so that we can have these kinds of political and intellectual disputation. I think universities are uniquely positioned in society to provide that, and I think it's really part of our mission. So that's one, okay, to provide safe democratic spaces. The other would be that I think a good Filipino university must engage with other institutions. You know, there is always this tendency, especially when you're talking about research for academics, for example, to be so focused on their own pet projects that they forget that there is a need for you know, their work, their intellectual labor to engage with social issues, and of course for the larger university to connect with other institutions of society. And I think that's an absolutely crucial role that universities need to play. Second, and the third, and this is not in any particular order. Universities need to provide intellectual leadership. I think that's something that we have to emphasize. Okay, and when we say intellectual leadership, I'm talking about across sectors, different sectors of the economy, across different sectors of society, and also across generations. Okay? I think that's where, of course, our teaching function comes in. Okay? I would like to emphasize that, training students and providing students with marketable or employment-ready skills. I mean, that's an important social good, but I don't think we should be fixated with that. I mean, there are other institutions that can provide that, and of course, universities can provide it. But I think it is more important for us to focus on providing intellectual leadership. Yeah. The university must be a mechanism for mobilizing the intellectual capital of society, so that this intellectual capital can be put to effective use. Okay. Next, I think it's also important for universities to play the role of, to catalyze convergence around critical issues. Okay, critical issues, to bring that kind of focus. Because in the case of modern societies, there's so many concerns that we tend to be paralyzed by the sheer enormity of our problems. I think it's important that universities provide that kind of focus. And lastly, I think a good Filipino university must become a force for citizenship. Okay, and I know that overlaps with the other things that I've said. Okay? It's crucial because, in the age of, in this highly instrumental age, in the age of where the market is dominant, the age where we tend to be very focused on our careers, the danger of implosion is always there. And I think universities need to constantly remind people that we need to be in the service of society, and I think again universities can and should play that role. I think earlier Tony mentioned about Civitas. I think I'm basically talking about the same thing here. So those are my points, and again, thank you. Thank you, Emma, for this opportunity to be part of this conversation. I hope that this conversation continues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Clem. I really am happy with our partnership in this Western Visayas, and I hope we will continue. As I mentioned to you earlier, I hope I can work with your scientists in the Climate Change Commission, as there are 3 of your faculty in the Climate Change Commission with me. So thank you very much. So now we have 5 minutes for questions and answers. Is there any burning question or 2 to 3 sentence comment from the audience?
Sorry, there's a question from Miss Jack, sorry.
Okay. Hi, Jack. Go. Okay.
Hello, ma'am. No, I just wanted to ask, if we, have a more context-specific analysis in the context of pandemic, what will be one feature of a good university that is located in cyberspace? So I'm wondering what the thoughts of our resource persons are.
Professor Connell and any of the university presidents? Melissa, would you like to say your question before I ask any of the resource persons? Yeah.
Sure, it's a short question. I just like to ask, what kind of incentive structure does university, as you have described, look like, especially now, post-pandemic, and with all of the new needs and complexities of our post-pandemic lives? Thank you.
Would any of our academic leaders Dr. Bautista, Dr. Rivera, Dr. Tulin, or Professor Connell will respond to that.
Yeah, so maybe can I ask Rex to clarify further what the question, what she means by the question before? Yeah.
Yeah, Jack. I think she was asking about in the context of the pandemic in the Philippines since, what would be like in the case of UP system?
And the question was about the cyber.
Yes, because we're now located on cyberspace, Dr. Cynthia, and I just want an idea of how you will characterize a good university that is, predominantly located now on cyberspace.
Thank you.
I guess if I understand it right, I guess we are forced to go to cyberspace by the circumstances we are in. I think a good university continuous learning. It's really a good university must be able to take care of its people so that they are not hurt by the pandemic. So going to cyberspace is addressing that. We should ensure the continuity of learning, and we should ensure continuity of learning, and maybe going to cyberspace partly addresses that. And we are still doing it, Rex. But the other one is consider equality in our plans, because we have, especially in UP, I think Ateneo would have students who are more well off. But UP, we have a large segment of students who are not well off. So that means equality means we're in cyberspace, but we also look at the ground. So if our students are not able to have the gadget, we actually try to provide gadgets, but they're coming late. But if the students are not able to connect, that we have to do everything so that they get whatever packages that the others get. We have actually said that we do synchronous classes, but they are not required because if they don't have internet connections, they will not be able to connect. But everyone is faculty members are asked to actually record and see to it that the students also get it and monitor students. In other words, it's continuity of learning in the context of a pandemic, taking into account our staff and the safety of everyone, and also the differences among our students in terms of access to education.
Thank you, Since. Now we can hear
Thank you, ma'am.
Professor Campuzano.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Well, the transition to remote learning, teaching and learning is really not an easy one. This is not just a question of providing access to the technology, and this is not just a question of, for example, faculty members gaining competence in the use of technology. This has to do with something more deeply cultural. And I think part of the problem has to do with the fact that, many teachers, for example, many students have been complaining about online learning. And I think part of the problem has to do with the fact that deep in their minds, the question is, how can we continue to do what we have always been doing without face-to-face interaction? I think that's not the only question that should be asked. In fact, that is probably, we should probably transition away from that question towards another question. The question is, how can we do things differently given the different environment? Okay, because if one were to still imagine teaching, in that directive way, the teacher being the sage on the stage, then online learning may not serve that purpose. If students, for example, will not assume a larger share of responsibility over their own learning, then they will always feel shortchanged by online teaching and learning. So I think the idea is to really reimagine teaching and learning towards something more learner-centered, so that there's student autonomy, and that the teachers are able to explore the possibilities that digital technology is able to offer. I think that's the more challenging part of maintaining a strong online presence, managing that transformation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Camposano. I'm really happy that you've mentioned about reimagining, because the inspiration really for this, webinar is that we at CCARPH, we realize that if we have to be relevant in this pandemic and also in the pandemic times, we have to learn to reinvent. I think as teachers, as researchers, and as engaged academics, and as academic leaders, we have to reinvent ourselves under the new normal. I don't think we can ever go back to the pre-pandemic times. I think we as a university and engaged researchers, engaged intellectuals, engaged academic leaders, I think we have to reinvent and reimagine and rediscover under the new normal how we can be more relevant and who can be more great contributors to the social well-being of our societies and the resilient, and I always say towards a resilient and sustainable future. So I would like to call on now Tony Yulo-Loyzaga, and can we have your piece, please?
Thank you very much, Emma, and I apologize to all for interrupting the program somewhat. First of all, thank you, Dr. Connell. Thank you to Doc Cinch and to Dr. Toby for the remarks and for the presentation, Dr. Connell. I'm a bit like a fish out of water today. I do not have a PhD. I'm not in academia. And so I forewarned Emma that my comments would really be from my own personal perspective in relation to the work that we do today. So when reflecting on the sessions today and the speakers, two names actually came to my own mind. And these have to do with my own roots in political science and my interest in responsive and adaptive architecture and urbanism. So these two names are Socrates and the architect Balkrishna Doshi. We've heard the views of our keynote speaker and the two reactors from leading universities in the country. From my own perspective, simplified. A university is a place that works so that questions may be asked, even if the people who work there and are there for the moment as students may come and leave with these and even more questions unanswered. A good university is a place that works so that questions in service of the notion of civitas, broadly defined, are asked. Teaching, research, outreach pursued, so that these questions may have a greater chance of being answered. My own thoughts here are really, number one, asking questions did not stop when Socrates was condemned by a mob, because as the notions of civitas continued to rise and fall, his method and questions endured. They morphed and ultimately fueled what we might recognize as or call the notion of democracy today. Secondly, Mr. Doshi, as some of you may know, is a 94-year-old architect born in Pune, India. He's been recognized in India and globally, having received recognition from the Pritzker Prize, the Royal Institute of British Architects Gold Medal for his work in environmentally and culturally sensitive design and engineering. Recognizing how his work values reflect both modernism, but also local, indigenous, and traditional knowledge and crafts. Whether this is socialized housing project for the poorest, the restoration of Nalanda, the ancient university in India, or institutional buildings that he's designed and helped build. In a conversation with Mr. Doshi in the early 2000s on what makes a city, he asked me one question: what is sacred to you? And then he proceeded to tell me the story of how he started his school and practice. Convinced he was to lead a life of service through design, he placed a desk along the road in front of his house and explained to whomever passed by and stopped and asked what he was trying to do. Ultimately, for me, an education is in and of the civitas. And this means asking questions that enable everyone in the university navigate both of St. Augustine's cities, the cities of man and the city of God. The university as we know it, cutting competitiveness for funding and rankings, the paper chase, disciplinary silos, the bureaucratic and administrative tyrannies some suffer, is really a construction with illusory, imaginary walls. If the trustees, administrator, faculty, co-workers cannot see beyond these walls, we really need to ask ourselves, are universities today asking the right questions and working in pursuit of what is sacred? Thank you, Emma, for the opportunity for sharing this message.
Thank you very much, Tony, for this excellent remarks. I think I was telling Tony earlier that, we need a fresh perspective. When all fish are in the same water, we need a perspective of somebody out from the water. So we have a few minutes. I have requested Professor Raewyn to really give us, concluding his gems of wisdom, and having heard our presidents here and leaders of our universities reinvented themselves under the pandemic, and also in a sense we are rethinking really of how we should be in the post-pandemic. I would like to call on now Raewyn Connell to give us your last words of wisdom for us.
Wisdom, hopefully. Thank you. Let me first of all thank everyone who's spoken and posed questions. It's all been very thoughtful and fascinating for me. I have been making notes, so I have learned quite a bit already from this discussion, and I hope I will continue to. My final reflections, rather than commenting on particular points running through, because there are so many good points that have been made. It's been a great discussion. Just a couple of general reflections. One is that we're in reinventing and remaking practically universities. In a way, we have to operate simultaneously at two levels. We have to operate at a very practical level. So I take entirely the points that have been made about the Filipino context of your issues and the Australian context of mine not being the same. That is relevant. We have to think in place. We have to think about universities as how they work as organizations practically. We have to think about the employment conditions of staff, both non-academic and academic. That's one level that we have to work at. The other level is working at the level of large ideas. We have to encourage fresh thinking about the university sector and how it works. We have to be bold intellectually. I think that's our business in universities, and we should apply it to our own work and workplaces too. And it's when we can combine bold thinking with practical engagement and working on the nuts and bolts that we actually can achieve change. And my final point is about there are resources for this. We're not inventing the world completely anew. In Australia, we have the habit of turning only to the United States or to Britain for ideas and models, but in fact, there are relevant models in South America, in Africa, in South Asia, in East Asia, in the Pacific that we can be learning from. So I encourage people to think around the majority world, as well as thinking in relationship to models from the global north. And we also need to think historically. There is a whole history of imaginative, progressive, indigenous, anti-colonial universities, which we have to draw on. There's a much richer and more fascinating history of universities than we usually know. What we're asking for in thinking about movement to new universities is the kind of thing that has been asked in the past. We do have traditions and inspiration from what our predecessors have done. And with those as part of our resources, I think it will be easier to persuade people that change is possible, as well as being very much needed. We can do it, and I think ultimately we will do it too.
Thank you very much, Professor Raewyn. I'm really, really grateful to you and to all the speakers for your great ideas. I mean, I would say really that what you have, everyone has given me to think that we should be all bold intellectuals, scholars, practitioners, professionals, and leaders to reimagine and to recast and reinvent our ways, because the crises and challenges of our time demand that everyone, I would say everyone, must rethink and redesign their lifestyle if we have to respond to the existential crisis of our time, that of climate crisis, that of social inequality, which has heavily affected by our systems in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as to the normal expectations of our institutions. So thank you very much. I will now call on Joy to close this seminar, and I would like to, perhaps Joy, we can take a picture of the whole of the whole panel before you give your closing remark, or at least close the webinar. Joy?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Porio. Thank you, Dr. Connell, and all our distinguished panel of reactors. Now, can I please request everyone to turn on your cameras so that we can take a screenshot of all the attendees?
Thank you. Oh, we have so great people with us.
All right. There you go. So thank you everyone for attending this webinar. We are very happy to have you all with us. And Dr. Porio, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I would like you to visit our Google Resilience Toolkit, oneword.ph, because you will see all the tools, the actionable science tools that we have done in partnership with Ateneo de Naga University, University of Philippines, Visayas, Mamantasan ng Lungsod ng Manila, and other local government units, Valenzuela, Pasig, Muntinlupa, Naga, and Iloilo, and other LGUs. Please visit them. And also, as I said, this is one of our first webinar that the coastal cities at risk were organized, simply because we feel that we have to reimagine our life together, and we have to recast and reinvent our, shall we say, our lives and our lifestyles. If we have to be more I always tell my staff, if we have to live a more meaningful life, a purposeful life, I think we have to re-examine and revise our lifestyles. I always tell my classes, when I start my class in Ateneo de Manila, I always give them two sayings. One by Socrates on the unexamined life is a tragic one, and the one by Shakespeare that says, to thine own self be true. And I always tell them, if we remember this, then maybe we can be more, live a meaningful life, a life that we continually learn, and we continually reimagine and reinvent our work and our commitments to a life. So thank you very much. I always tell my students also that I think everyone must contribute to the construction of the well-being of our societies, the well-being of our universities, and the well-being of our communities and our people, especially those vulnerable ones that are constantly, battling the effects of climate change and the effects of social inequality under COVID. So thank you very much. And you can see here, we would like to encourage you to look at our websites and our posts, and also to write to us if there's anything that you'd like to work with us. So thank you very much. Thank you all.